Gray. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship and to speak after the Honourable Member for Kettering has opened this debate, which I thought he did very, very well. And I also noted that the last time I spoke in a Westminster Hall debate on this matter, he was, of course, in the chair. And it was good to hear his views this afternoon. I really welcome this debate. I think it's really important that we have a debate about what is actually a very emotive issue in an atmosphere of calm and hopefully in a spirit where reason can dominate rather than sometimes the hysteria that we see in the national media. And certainly there was much more hysteria the last time this issue was debated here in Westminster Hall. And I think that religious minority communities in this country, the Muslim and the Jewish community, rightly felt picked on and unfairly scrutinised, as if to say somehow their way of life was significantly more cruel in some way, and that they were reckless as to that level of cruelty than any other communities, which I think is a deeply unfair mischaracterisation of the seriousness with which practising religious minority communities in this country take their religious obligations. I also think it's very clear from some of the interventions already that there will remain very significant points of disagreement at the end of this debate, but it is important that we continue to examine these issues in an atmosphere that, as the Honourable Member for Kettering said, generates light rather than heat. And can I just also say that, of course, I am, as I've noted before, a practising Muslim, so this debate matters to me on a personal level, but I also represent many thousands of Muslims and also practising Jews, both communities of whom have written to me asking me to place on the record their views and their feelings in this debate this afternoon. I thought it was interesting, Mr Gray, just to note firstly that the first national legislative requirement in England and Wales for stunning before slaughter was in the Slaughter of Animals Act in 1933, which even at that point retained an exception from stunning for religious slaughter by Jews and by Muslims. And that strikes me as a very British approach to an issue that is clearly of long-standing interest both to the public at large but also to legislators in this place. And the government, it is my understanding, I hope the Minister will confirm this afternoon, has made its position clear that it does not intend to move away from having an exception within the law for religious slaughter that is not stunned. And I welcome that commitment on behalf of my constituents for whom this is an incredibly important issue. And as we've already heard in the debate so far, the key point of disagreement is, of course, around welfare. It is, I have to say to honourable members who try to make the distinction between a debate that's focused on religion rather than welfare, it's very difficult actually to make that distinction. For those of us who are members of a religious minority in this country who practice our faith, it's very difficult for us to say, actually, we're only talking about one thing here, not something else. You shouldn't really feel so strongly about it. That is simply not possible to do. All of these issues are tied intimately with one another, and they should therefore be considered in that context. And I know that there will be very differing views, and there is different signs that we can all quote at each other as well in support of our respective positions when it comes to whether or not non-stunned slaughter is or can be described as humane. But I think one point that is often not made in these debates is that for religious minority communities, the non-stunned slaughter of animals must also be done in a way that ensures that animal does not suffer. And the whole reason for having those rules and laws in the first place was precisely to prevent the suffering of animals. And I think actually it's a testimony to those ancient texts that have laid down those laws that there was such a concern for animal rights at that point. And that motivation and that desire to ensure that an animal does not suffer needless pain, I think is really important for everybody to remember when we're discussing these matters in debates such as this. And also, just to make the point that for religious people who are looking for religious slaughter of animals before they consume meat in their food, that act itself is an act of faith, actually, because religious people who care about these issues do not take the killing of animals lightly. The member made the point about there being no good way to kill an animal. This is exactly a point that I made in the last debate as well. But for religious communities, the right to take the life of an animal is an expression of faith. It is a God-given right, but can only be exercised in very specific and prescribed circumstances. So for people who take their religious obligations seriously and who are practicing their religious obligations, these are matters of great concern. These are not things that are done in a way that is negligent or reckless as to what is the act that is being committed. Everybody recognises, practicing Muslims and Jews know when they are consuming meat, that meat, they are only allowed that meat as a matter of religious law in certain circumstances. They recognise an animal lived, it had a life, and then it died, and they care about that fact before they consume that meat. And I think that's really important, again, to recognise, because often this debate happens in a way that it implies that somehow we simply just don't care about the welfare of animals. We just want it our way and no other way, without recognising the reasons behind how some of those ways have come about. Of course.
I'm most grateful to her for giving away. Before she concludes her remarks, though, will she deal with the point about labelling? Surely there can be no objection to supporting more comprehensive labelling of halal meat.
I'm very grateful for that intervention, and I was just about to come on to the next part of my remarks, which is precisely about labelling. But just before I leave the issue on welfare, just if you give me one moment, just before I leave the issue around welfare, if I may say that, and the point was made by the Honourable Lady, the member for Brighton, that actually the enforcement of the current rules that we already have on welfare is actually just as important when we discuss these issues as whether or not religious slaughter is humane or can be done in other ways, because any abuse of the rules as we currently have doesn't exactly inspire confidence that any additional rules that we may bring in will also be followed. And the point on misstunning here is really, really important. For religious communities, the risk that an animal has been misstunned and then slaughtered in accordance with religious rites is negated because of the misstunning process. So even for those who accept that stunning may be possible under a different reading of religious law, they would still not tolerate misstunning, which is just as cruel and barbaric as any of the act that might be perceived.
S.Timms.
Very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. She's making a lot of points that will be welcomed by a large number of my constituents who have contacted me about this. In the discussions she's had, and particularly the point she's just raising about misstunning, have concerns been expressed to her about the pretty horrific things which seem to be going on in reality under the label of misstunning. In theory, that's supposed to protect animal welfare. In reality, it seems to be very different.
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and this is why it's so important that we get to a position where we can guarantee that the basic standards we have at the moment are fully realised in slaughterhouses, that we all understand better what actually goes on in slaughterhouses and how different types of animals are slaughtered in the current process, because I think it's important, again, that we shed more light on what goes on there as well before we start moving the debate elsewhere to other practices which complicate things further, which may or may not be a road that we want to go down, but it doesn't, as I say, inspire confidence about enforcement if we can't even do things correctly. Now, I give way for the last time because I want other people to speak.
Thank you very much. If essentially we are talking about the clash of two principles, one being animal welfare and the other the right of people to practice their religions, and if it was proved that there were serious issues of animal welfare, which of those two does the honourable member believes trumps the other?
I'm grateful to the honourable member for that intervention. I suppose my start point for entering the debate is different. I don't accept that non-stunned slaughter is a cruel or inhumane method of slaughter if done properly in accordance with either the Jewish religious texts or the Islamic religious texts. Don't forget, these texts lay down very clear, very detailed rules about, for example, how one animal is not to witness what happens to another animal. I think that would never apply in any of the slaughterhouses with mechanised slaughter of large volumes of animals taking place today. So I simply reject the basis of his question. If I could just move on to the issue around labelling, and again we've had this debate before. I do agree with labelling of our meat, and I think that all consumers in this country should have a much better idea of where our meat comes from. And I suppose my perspective on the debate is shaped by, as I said, being a practicing Muslim. I've spent my whole life looking at labels, trying to work out whether something's got alcohol derivatives in it or not, trying to work out if there's any derivatives of pig meat, for example. And so for me, actually, labels which have a lot of detail and information on them is a really great thing, because it enables me to exercise choice. At the moment, when I'm in doubt about something, I simply put it away, but I may be missing out on something I could have perfectly legitimately consumed. And in fact, often I rely on the good old V symbol on food, where it says it's suitable for vegans and vegetarians, and I think, well, then it must be okay for me as long as it's not a meat product. But that doesn't help me out when it comes to meat. But I do reject what the Honourable Member for Kettering said about the danger of too much information. Actually, I simply do not buy that argument, because if we're going to say that actually people should be able to make a choice, that choice should be fully informed. If you're going to say you want to shed light, you shouldn't say that that light only extends to one arbitrary threshold and no further. That seems very unfair to me, because actually where he is suggesting that the line is drawn currently, halal or kosher, stun or non-stun, well, that line, I'm afraid to say, actually just supports a debate that is more about heat rather than light. It supports a debate that's conducted in a way that is stigmatising communities and implying somehow that their way of doing things is really bad, and so we're going to have a special label that means you can opt out of it. But it forgets actually that, as I said, there's no good, clean way of killing an animal. It ends up dead one way or the other, and actually we should know more about how animals are stunned, because I think lots of people may well make the choice that actually they don't want to consume meat full stop, and that would be their right. It's not a choice I would make, because I'm quite well informed on these issues. So I make my choice knowing exactly what happens when stunning or non-stunning takes place and different types of slaughter. But lots of people, the majority I would say in our country, do not. And I think that we should, if we are really going to be people in, not just in our country but across the world, who are champions of animal rights and animal welfare, then we should be better informed as a nation. And I think that detailed labelling would go a long way to supporting that. And also because the point has been made that within the Muslim community, halal meat that is produced, 80% of that meat is stunned, and it's certainly true to say that large numbers of Muslims have accepted stunning of meat before slaughter, and if that is a choice they wish to make, then that is something that I think should be open to those people. And clearly there's a demand for it because it's being produced and it's being consumed. But actually, for those of us who wish to make a different choice, it's just as important to know that our halal meat is non-stunned, and to be able to rely on a label to give us true and accurate information. So I am all for labelling, but it should be thorough labelling, and not because we want to muddy the waters in the debate, which I think is what sometimes some people on the other side might think we're trying to do when we say put on whether the stunning is by bolt or whatever. It's actually precisely because we're living in the information age. People want to know what's happened to an animal, and we shouldn't draw an arbitrary line that puts some communities under scrutiny, greater scrutiny, and making people feel threatened. We should actually just put it all there for all to see. And I think in an age of social media as well, it's very easy actually to put lots of detailed information out there in the public domain in a way that the public who care about it will go away and learn and understand and then apply those rules to their daily life. And I just want to finish on this point, Mr. Gray, very, very quickly, that I accept that as technology develops, we should continue to re-examine these issues. I think, speaking from a Muslim perspective, it is an imperative that actually, as society evolves, as science evolves, that we continue to examine our jurisprudence and our approach to that jurisprudence. But I see nothing at this point which I think supports a derogation from the exception that we have for non-stunned slaughter in this country. I think we should ask much deeper questions about mechanisation of our slaughter processes and the volume of meat that we produce, and whether that in itself makes it very difficult to maintain any kind of real standards whatsoever, because when so much meat has to be produced in small amounts of time, it's very hard to keep track of different rules and regulations. I think that is where I would say that the science, and as it's developed, that science should be more focused. I see no reason for us to move away from the very British way in which we have come at these issues, where we have maintained this exception in law for many decades, and I hope that the government will confirm again today that that exception will remain for the foreseeable future as well.
James Pace.
Great, thank you very much indeed for calling me early in the debate. I suspect, if you asked honourable members of this House, I'm probably not seen as somebody who's particularly squeamish or with too